All right, so if you're into health and wellness at all, you've definitely heard the big debate around intermittent fasting, right? Is it some kind of metabolic miracle, or is it really just a sneaky trick to get you to eat less? The internet was buzzing about this one study that basically said fasting is no different from any old diet. But what if I told you a much, much more powerful study came out that gives us a pretty shocking answer? Let's get into it. I mean, this really is the million-dollar question, isn't it? When someone gets healthier from fasting, is it because there's something magical happening in that fasting window? Or is it just because they lost weight? And let's be real, that's a super valid point. Of course, you're going to get healthier if you lose excess weight. So the real trick is, how do you separate the two? How can we figure out if the timing itself has some kind of superpower? And that brings us right to the heart of the problem. You've basically got these two competing ideas about why fasting actually works. Okay, so on one side, you've got what we can call the calorie view. It's super straightforward. You've got a smaller window to eat, so naturally, you eat less food. Fewer calories in means you lose weight, and boom, that's where the health benefits come from. Simple. But then you have the timing view. And this one's a bit more intriguing. It says that when you eat actually kicks off these unique biological processes. And, get this, it has nothing to do with how many calories you're eating. And this is pretty much where all the confusion started. There was this pretty famous study that made a huge splash. It basically concluded that a 14-hour fast gives you the exact same results as just, cutting your calories. But here's the thing about that. A 14-hour fast, honestly, a lot of us do that by accident, right? You finish dinner at 8 p.m., have breakfast at 10 a.m. It's not exactly what you'd call an aggressive fast. So it kind of left all the big questions just hanging in the air. So, to finally settle this debate, scientists came up with this really brilliant breakthrough experiment. It was actually the first of its kind in humans, and it was designed for one specific reason: to isolate the power of time. And the way they did this is so important. It's called a controlled feeding trial. Now, this isn't one of those studies where they just ask people to write down what they ate. Oh no. This is the real deal. It's clinically supervised, which means scientists literally prepare and hand you every single meal. They control every single calorie, every gram of protein, fat, and carbs. It's that level of scientific rigor that makes the results so powerful. Okay, the design of this study was just brilliant. So first, the scientists figured out the exact number of calories each person needed to eat to maintain their current weight. The key here, no weight loss allowed, 0. Then they split everyone into 2 groups. Group 1 ate all their food in a normal 12-hour window. Group 2 ate the exact same amount of food, but in a much tighter 6-hour window, and they had to be done by 3 p.m. They did this for 5 weeks, and then, this is the really cool part, the groups swapped places and did it all over again, just to make sure the results were solid. So the only thing that changed was the timing. And because they took weight loss completely out of the equation, what they found was, honestly, pretty shocking. This right here, this is probably the single most important number from the entire study. What was the average weight change for everyone who participated? 0. Not a single pound, on average. The experiment worked perfectly. And what that means is, it proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that any health changes they saw had nothing to do with weight loss. So, what happened to the group with that compressed 6-hour eating window? Well, the improvements were dramatic. First off, their insulin sensitivity got way better. That means their bodies got much more efficient at handling carbs. Second, their pancreatic function improved, which is huge for keeping blood sugar stable. Third, they saw a big drop in something called oxidative stress. We'll talk more about that in a second, but it's a major driver of aging. And maybe the most surprising thing of all, their appetite actually went down. Think about that. They were eating the exact same amount of food, but they felt less hungry. You see, because the experiment was so tightly controlled and so well designed, the results are just rock solid. Like the source material says, it's really hard to poke holes in it. You just can't argue with this kind of data. Okay, so that's all great for the scientists. But what does all this clinical stuff actually mean for you and me, for our everyday health? So remember how I mentioned that oxidative stress went down? That might sound a little sciencey, but here's what it really means. Their bodies were taking less of a beating at the cellular level. Think of it like less rust on your cells. This constant, low-level damage is a huge factor in how we age. So the idea that just changing your mealtimes could slow that process down, wow, from a longevity standpoint, that's absolutely fascinating.
And this is what makes it so clear why this new study is such a game changer. That other, more popular study, it looked at a pretty tame 14-hour fasting window, and it included weight loss. So of course, it found no difference between fasting and dieting. But this new study, it used a much tougher 6-hour window. It completely removed weight loss from the picture, and it proved that meal timing all by itself has these incredible, unique benefits. They were literally asking two totally different questions.
So what all this new science really points to is a totally new way to think about fasting. It's not about going harder, it's about being smarter.
Now, the big takeaway here isn't that you need to go out and start doing a 6-hour eating window every single day. I mean, let's remember, the study itself was only 5 weeks. A much more practical and sustainable idea, based on this research, is to think about strategically adding in one of these more compressed eating windows, maybe just a few times a week. That way you can tap into those powerful metabolic benefits without completely burning yourself out. And that kind of leaves us with this one last, really fascinating thought, doesn't it? We've just seen pretty convincing proof that when you eat can be just as important as what you eat, and that it has nothing to do with losing weight. It just makes you wonder, if a simple change in meal timing can have such a huge impact, what other small, almost invisible things in our daily routines hold that same kind of untapped power for our health?